The road stretched endlessly before us, a narrow, winding path that seemed to lead into the heart of nowhere. It was late autumn, and the trees were just beginning to shed their leaves, revealing the bare branches that seemed to reach out like twisted hands. The rain had been relentless, drumming steadily on the roof of the bus as we traveled deeper into the Lake District. Our destination was one that had been shrouded in mystery for years, the Blackwood Inn. I sat in the back of the bus, staring out of the fogged-up window, my mind racing. I had heard the stories, of course, the whispered tales among locals, the rumors that had circulated for decades. The inn had been abandoned by its last owners years ago, but it remained standing, waiting for the day when someone would once again open its doors. And now, it seemed that fate had brought me here. We were a group of ninth-year students, part of a historical field trip arranged by our school to learn about the inns and old estates of the region. Our teacher, Mr. Harris, a man in his early 40s, seemed more eager to keep us focused on the geography of the area rather than the history of Blackwood Inn itself. I noticed, however, that whenever someone brought up the inn specifically, his face would tighten, his eyes darting away as if trying to avoid the subject. I couldn't help but feel there was something he wasn't telling us. As we approached the hill where the inn was perched, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The fog grew thicker, obscuring our view of the surrounding landscape. The air was colder too, as though the mountain itself was rejecting our presence. I could feel the tension building in the pit of my stomach, but I didn't say anything. There was no point in voicing what everyone else was clearly thinking. Something about this place didn't feel right. The Blackwood Inn loomed before us as the bus came to a halt. It stood at the top of the hill, a dilapidated structure of stone and wood, its once grand facade now crumbling under the weight of time. The windows were dark, as if they had been closed for years, and the door seemed to hang loosely on its hinges, as though it had been waiting for someone to open it again. The entire place seemed to emit a sense of abandonment and decay. "Welcome to Blackwood Inn," Mr. Harris said, his voice a little too cheerful for my liking. "This is where we'll be staying for the night." We disembarked and gathered our things, following Mr. Harris into the darkened lobby. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet as we stepped inside. The air was musty, thick with the scent of old wood and mildew. The lobby was sparsely furnished with an assortment of mismatched chairs and a worn-out rug that barely covered the cold stone floor. There was a large fireplace at the far end of the room, but the fire had long since gone out, leaving only a few glowing embers behind. I could tell from the looks on my classmates' faces that they, too, felt the unease in the air. It wasn't just a state of disrepair that made the place feel uncomfortable. It was something more subtle, something intangible. The silence here was unlike any silence I had ever experienced before. It was thick, heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Mr. Harris gave us a brief tour of the inn, explaining that the building had been in disuse for decades. The last owners, the Blackwood family, had vanished mysteriously one stormy night, and the inn had been abandoned shortly thereafter. Since then, the property had been left to decay, with only occasional visitors daring to venture up the hill. According to Mr. Harris, it was the perfect place for our field trip, an example of a once thriving estate now reclaimed by nature. We were shown to our rooms, each one more sparsely furnished than the last. The wallpaper was peeling, the beds were lumpy, and the air felt cold, even though the heating was on. The windows were sealed shut, the glass fogged with age. There was something about these rooms that made me feel trapped, as though the walls themselves were closing in around me. Dinner was served in the dimly lit dining room. The room had long tables, most of them covered in dust, and large portraits hung on the walls. Paintings of men and women in old-fashioned attire, their eyes following us as we ate. The food was bland, and the conversation was sparse. We were all too aware of the strange atmosphere hanging over us. Even Mr. Harris, usually a jovial man, seemed on edge. After dinner, we gathered around the fireplace in the lobby, hoping to unwind. The fire had been rekindled, and the warmth from the flames provided some relief from the cold. But the comfort was fleeting. As we sat there, a strange noise echoed through the inn, a soft thudding, almost like footsteps. We all fell silent, listening closely. The sound seemed to come from upstairs. Probably just the wind, Mr. Harris said quickly, but his voice lacked the confidence it usually held. We returned to our rooms for the night, but sleep didn't come easily. The creaking of the old building, the rustling of the wind outside, and the constant sense of being watched kept me awake. At one point, I thought I heard something soft, like a whisper, coming from the hallway outside my door. I got out of bed and opened the door cautiously, but when I peered into the darkened corridor, there was no one there. The only sound was the faint hum of the wind. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the inn. I decided to take a walk around the grounds. The fog had lifted somewhat, but the air was still damp, and the trees surrounding the inn were shrouded in mist. As I walked along the overgrown path, I came across a small cemetery. The tombstones were old and weathered, their inscriptions barely legible. I stood there for a few moments, reading the names on the stones. Most of them were members of the Blackwood family, some dating back to the early 1800s. One gravestone in particular caught my eye. It was a large, imposing monument with a strange inscription: Samuel Blackwood, 1802 to 1837. The year of death seemed far too young for someone of his stature, and the engraving beneath the name was cryptic: He who walks in shadows. The words sent a chill down my spine, and as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd: footprints in the mud, leading away from the grave, as though someone had recently walked by. But the footprints weren't from shoes. They were bare, human-like tracks, too large for any of us. I returned to the inn, feeling a strange sense of dread settle over me. I tried to shake it off, but it lingered. That afternoon, Mr. Harris decided to take us on a tour of the old part of the inn, where the Blackwood family had once lived. The hallways were narrow, the air musty, and the further we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. We reached a small, forgotten room at the end of the hall. The door was locked, but Mr. Harris had a key. He opened it slowly, revealing a dusty, decaying space. There were old furniture pieces covered in sheets, and the room felt suffocatingly cold. But what stood out the most was a portrait on the wall. A portrait of a man with hollow eyes, a gaunt face, and a twisted smile. It was the portrait of Samuel Blackwood. "Most people don't know about this room," Mr. Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This was where Samuel Blackwood spent his final days. They say he was tormented by something something dark that he couldn't escape. Just then, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. We rushed to the stairs, but when we reached the bottom, there was nothing there, just the empty, silent inn. The events of that day began to spiral out of control. People started hearing strange noises, whispers, footsteps, doors slamming shut on their own. Mr. Harris, who had been our calm guide, was visibly shaken. His demeanor had shifted. He was no longer the composed teacher we had come to trust. His eyes were wide, and he constantly glanced over his shoulder, as though expecting something or someone to appear from the shadows. That night, things took a darker turn. I woke to the sound of the door to my room creaking open. My heart raced as I turned to face the door. It was barely ajar, but no one was there. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, growing long and thin, like they were alive. And then, in the darkness, I saw it. A figure, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly into me. I froze, unable to move, as the figure reached out a bony hand toward me. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The next morning, Mr. Harris was gone. His room had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. The only clue was a single note left on his pillow. "They're coming for you." We left Blackwood Inn as quickly as we could, but the experience haunted me. I never learned what happened to Mr. Harris, or why the inn had such a grip on all of us. But I knew this much. The Blackwood Inn was no ordinary place, and whatever dark forces lingered there would never let go.